It's Friday afternoon at 4 p.m. in Europe. It's Space Café WebTalk time. Our Space Café BeNeLux by me, Chiara, Moenter, and Bano Barzingi will begin soon. As always, we really appreciate your participation and ongoing feedback. It's really valuable for us and helps us to improve our work. So, SpaceWatch.Global is a Europe-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. And I'd like to thank all our private and corporate supporters that showed their commitment to keeping our independent journalism alive. We really appreciate it. And I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our biweekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcasts. The last one features Urs Ganzam, a space super nerd, who talks about how to build your spacecraft. Definitely worth a listen. And for all our fans of audio content, we also have new episodes in our Space Café Radio, which you can find on all major podcast platforms. We also keep our fan shop online open for you to support us actively and become a space watcher. If you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our webpage in the events section and on YouTube. And we will host our Space Café BeNeLux live on a regular basis. And with that, I want to pass over to my co-host Bano and get this session on the road.
Thank you, Chiara. Hi, everyone. I am Bano Barzingi, editor of today's newsletter. And sitting online next to me is Chiara, the event coordinator at SpaceWatch.Global. In October 2020, Chiara and I came together and we started chatting over a cup of coffee about space, and the universe. This moment eventually became a never-ending conversation. Like many of you space watchers, we were both intrigued and overexcited about the unaccountable possibilities that space provides us. Our excitement and curiosity is what led us to reach out to SpaceWatch.Global and collaborate. With these webinars, we aim to make knowledge more accessible and include everyone in this mind-blowing adventure. So thank you all for joining us on this journey. And today we will speak to Dr. Mindy Howard.
Yes, we are super honored today to be joined by Dr. Mindy Howard. Mindy has set out to passionately achieve her dream of going to space, which I think all of us in the room can share. And after her 21-year career in the oil industry, she's worked in 35 different countries as a trainer, senior leader, and engineering advisor. She now harnessed her academic and professional skills to create the first and only psychological space training program, Inner Space Training. She is in discussions with several organizations to train, coach, and accompany commercial astronauts to space. And in addition, she's working for Blue Abyss Ltd, the world's first commercial astronaut training center, as the director of Inner Space Training. She has appeared on the Discovery and Travel channels and on the radio, both in the US and in Europe, as a space correspondent and commentator. Mindy is also a TEDx speaker and a guest lecturer at the International Space University. And she's the author of the book entitled Blast Off, Train Like an Astronaut for Success on Earth, which we will be hearing more about today.
Well, Chiara, thank you so much for that introduction. Dr. Mindy, again, welcome. Chiara just briefly mentioned that you worked in the space sector, and it has always been your dream. But before entering this chapter, you were working at the oil industry for 21 years. So could you maybe tell us something about that previous career chapter?
My previous career in the oil sector, I had a variety of jobs working for Royal Dutch Shell, starting out with a technical position as a human factors engineer. So I got a great opportunity to design oil platforms and control rooms from a human perspective, and do a lot of training actually in terms of training engineers to think about that human factor. But that's actually kind of helped me many years later develop my own training. And I had several jobs within Shell, from a technical role in human factors engineering to being a diversity instructor, and as well as a diversity manager. And then I finally got into doing sustainable development in the oil company. So I was a manager of one of the largest divisions for sustainability, and also did some training, trying to get people to have a more sustainable mindset in an industry which is not so sustainable.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So sustainability is something that drove you, but also just diversity and inclusiveness. So what exactly drove you to make the switch to the space industry then?
Well, I always had a dream to become an astronaut, and you know, and I had every intention, I guess, in fulfilling that. Just didn't know how I would when I was working at Shell actually leave. But Shell presented an opportunity, which was a reorganization back in 2010. And they were asking for volunteers to leave with money. So I raised my hand and I said, I'll volunteer. And they said, well, we'll also give you a training to help you secure your next job. What do you want to be? And I remember looking at the career counselor and saying, well, actually, I want to be an astronaut. And they were like, come on, what do you really want to do? And I said, no, and I really want to be an astronaut. And I managed to convince this person to send me away to a flight training school in the States where there was a centrifuge. And that's, you know, funnily enough, Shell paid for one of my first trainings where I actually got to experience what it was like to have 6 Gs on me and to feel what it was like to be to train as a Virgin Galactic astronaut or passenger. And so that was the sort of an incredible experience where I had a peak experience in the centrifuge. But I also saw not everybody was smiling like I was. There were also people in the training who were, you know, kind of looking like this, terrified as they were going around and around. And I remember thinking, are there any trainings out there to help people sort of stay calm and focus for their space flight? Or only the physical was there, which was this course. And they told me that that didn't exist yet. And I thought, that's something I think I could do with my background in training and human factors engineering, and created inner space training for that. So it kind of, I got there in the end a little bit from the training perspective, but throughout my time before Shell, I actually had applied to NASA as a NASA astronaut, and I got on their short list of the last 200 people from the thousands, called a highly qualified astronaut candidate, but then unfortunately never got chosen to be chosen as an astronaut. And then that was a real sort of bummer moment. And I thought, what else can I do to become an astronaut? Then I also became Dutch in order to try at the European Space Administration. So, you know, I had tried NASA, then became Dutch, tried ESA, and then finally, you know, started getting into the world of commercial space, which did not even exist back when I was a little girl. So I couldn't even imagine sort of where I am today when I was a little girl, because I thought there was only one way to get to space. So it's a bit of a long, strange path, but in the end, I got there.
Yeah, you did get there, and you're here today. So we're very thankful for that crazy path, actually. It's very good, and also sometimes surprising what life brings you. What really intrigued me there is that you said that Shell was surprised by you saying you wanted to be an astronaut, but I do think that the other way around, you were probably surprised that Shell did support you in this dream, because
no, for sure, and paid for a training. I mean, exactly. At that time, I was also with a group called what used to be called Astronauts for Hire. I think now they're called the Association of Spaceflight Professionals. And these were a group of people who were sort of paying for training so that they could actually run experiments for people in suborbital space. And so by, you know, getting proficient in, you know, parabolic flights, you know, helicopter ditching, which I also had to do for the oil industry, and doing this centrifuge and other things, we would then hope somebody would pay us to run, you know, to go to space to do some sort of suborbital research. And so, I mean, I would never have expected that that Shell would have been paying for at least one of these trainings that I had to pay for myself in the end.
Yeah,
but it was fantastic that they
yeah.
did.
I can imagine that. Sometimes these companies also surprise you, so that's quite interesting as well. So is it difficult to train them, like people in general, while you haven't been to space yet?
I think sort of yes and no. I mean, from a practical point of view, you know, it would always be better if I had that experience, and I hope soon to have that experience, just from my own kind of credibility. But of course, there's plenty of NASA and ESA astronaut trainers who have never been to space, you know, but you can use lots of simulated training environments to, you know, to get that same kind of feeling or to give that experience in other ways. So I think, you know, you can make things as realistic as possible for people, and I think you can come a long way, even not having gone to space. But I hope that will soon change.
Well, I can also hope the same for you.
Yeah, that picks up quite nicely what we want to talk about more, because we would like to learn a bit more about this training that you do.
Exactly.
Especially also seeing the difference to maybe the more like the real astronaut training. So we see from ESA the basic training includes like an introduction and fundamentals, then a bit more of an insight into space systems and operations, and then special skills. And you've now also mentioned that you've undergone like the centrifuge and the parabolic flight. So you have had a bit of like these touching points, but despite this great palette already, there seems to be really still a gap to fill, because you focus now on trainings of the brain and psychology and like really the mental training. So could you take us a bit more through the general steps of that training?
Sure. I mean, first of all, to me, I think there, you know, we need to do on some things more for regular people who are going to space, in terms of preparing them and getting them fit to fly, more than the typical NASA or ESA astronaut who typically have come from a military background, 70%, you know, who are used to doing training, who are used to being told what to do, who are also selected out, or people are selected out if they have any kind of psychological issues like claustrophobia, panic attacks, or anxieties, or any other kinds of antisocial behavior. So we're really talking about two different types of people, two different kettle of fish, as I say, you know, in terms of fitness to fly from ground zero, from starting out. But in my opinion, also, I mean, like the approaches that NASA and ESA have, which is really to, you know, through sheer repetition, train scenarios over and over and over and over, things that the astronauts will do. You know, commercial astronauts don't have the time to do that, and probably, you know, they're not that willing to do that either. So you have to kind of dumb down the mission. You have to make it so that, if possible, they're not going to hurt themselves and other people. You know, there are some suborbital flights that will have researchers. So, you know, those kind of people who are going to space for doing research have a real sort of job that they need to do, that has to be done during those 4 minutes. So it's much more serious for those people, but they're going to be mixed in with people who are also going to want to be, you know, making rock videos, you know, taking selfies as they're doing, you know, somersaults. And so you start to get the environment, you can start to picture is going to be a little bit chaotic in the suborbital, you know, arena, where, you know, people have all sorts of different agendas, and they're going to be mixed together on the same flight. So what you need to be teaching people, you know, are ways basically that they can kind of control themselves, their own body and their own sort of mental state, as well as, not injuring other people. Whereas, let's say the NASA Asia astronauts, these things are kind of like, that's the norm, so it's not, and by the repetition, they're probably not going to be having anxiety attacks because, after you do things 100 times, it starts to become very natural. Yeah. So, you really have, different sort of types of people, different types of environments. And especially from the mental side, I would say, there's two very important aspects of why you need to train people mentally. And the first is, a safety / enjoyment factor as well. So one is that you want to keep people safe, to be able to sort of not freak out and not to kind of interfere with your panic attacks, anxiety, or flailing around, and not interfere with other paying customers. And so that's very important. But, and also from an enjoyment point of view, if you remember, like William Shatner, who, he's 90 years old, he had no training, and he said ahead of time, I'm scared to death. But yet I still want to do this event. If he had some training ahead of time, I'm sure he would have had a much better time, even though he had this most incredible experience. Somehow, strangely enough, I think he was quite lucky that he didn't. Well, we don't know that he didn't Shatner himself along the way, because he looked pretty scared along the way. But I think he could have had a much better time if he wasn't in that panic mode. He was really, really quite scared. So, you start to see, like, this is going to be the norm. People who don't have training are going to be taking these trips because training is not yet mandatory, which blows my mind. The regulations are not there yet. It's like it's the beginning of the, when people used to fly airplanes in the 1950s, people were no seat belts, smoking, all of that was allowed. And until, things started to happen and regulations started to come later on, this is kind of the stage that the training, the space training is at right now, where people are saying, no training is necessary in the beginning. Let's just see how it all goes. And, after the first incidents or accidents, I'm sure they will change things, and, it will become mandatory. But right now, you sign a waiver and off you go. So, I know there will be some incidences from famous people coming up in the next few months, or when they start flying.
Yeah, that really is a shame that it is not mandatory, because it is a very important factor to consider. And now, just focusing on what you were mentioning before, that there's a lot to learn from different fields and different environments as well. We actually have a question from Mark Meyer, who's joining us from Cologne in Germany. And he's asking, how can we take up the know-how from mining under Earth and in deep sea diving up to space? So how to take on these different environments.
Do you mean, like, what are the lessons learned from mining? I don't know mining and deep sea diving that well. I mean, they're not my background, but I can imagine that, as a diver, which I am, you really need to be able to sort of stay calm under pressure and controlling your breathing. And, that is so essential to controlling your whole mental state, not only your oxygen use, but, a lot of the same kinds of calming breaths that you do for diving. Yeah. You're going to be doing in mental with inner space training, as you learn how to breathe more calmly, from lowering your down in your diaphragm, and that will automatically start to calm you when you start practicing these things more.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can imagine that just the breathing exercises are one of the things that will definitely carry over.
Definitely, and you can see breathing exercises actually everywhere. When you need to calm down, this is the way to go to. And looking at these techniques, in your book, Blast Off, which came out in 2019, you have introduced other people right here on Earth to use these techniques as well, these techniques of commercial astronaut training. So what we were wondering is if you could give us some examples that you mentioned in our book that we can use in our daily lives as well, next to the breathing.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I have one particular tool that that I use a lot when we're trying to sort of get people to be aware of what's happening around them and to calm themselves. And it's I created a mnemonic device called Babusa, and
Babusa.
each of the letters in Babusa stand for something. So if we do this together, like the B stands for breath or breathe, and it's essentially first in through your nose and then hold it, and then out through your mouth. You can also breathe out through your nose, but it's more important that you take that deep breath in, hold it, and blow it out. And then the next step is you're going to want to, so O stands for observe your surroundings. Take a look kind of around you, who's next to you, are there any potential risks or dangers of maybe individuals who might be around you that you might want to kind of take stock, and go back inward again and take another deep breath in, hold it, and then blow it out. And already you start, just by taking these breaths, you're already taking it down a notch in terms of anxiety or in terms of just calming yourself. And I always test my heartbeat. I'm always sort of sitting there with the stopwatch going like, let's see how, by doing this, how the before and the after. U then stands for sort of understand where you are in the flight profile. So are you at launch? Are you at the weightlessness phase as the space plane's going over the apogee, or are you going back into reentry? Because each of these different flight phases have mental and physical challenges that you're going to need to sort of be aware for in terms of certain breathing, other kinds of breathing exercises, like to counteract the high G forces and that sort of stuff. And then, it's helpful to know what's coming up. So that's why this step is important. And then the S stands for go back inward, sense how you're feeling, notice where your heart is it beating fast, is it sick to your stomach, what's going on, take stock of like what's going on in your body. And then the last step is A, anchor the calm feeling. So after you go through and do this a number of times and practice, you start to realize like, oh, every time I do it, I feel a little bit better. I take it down a notch, and I introduce an anchor in the training, an NLP term where people can sort of kind of call up a mental state. And in this case, it's calmness. We train going through Babusa, doing certain breathing exercises. We'll call calmness up, and I squeeze my thumb every time I go through a round of Babusa. So soon, I don't even need to go through all the letters of Babusa. I can just squeeze my thumb, and my body will recognize, oh yeah, that's, calmness. And soon, the more you practice this, the better things will get. And you can also introduce neurofeedback tools, as we do in inner space training, to kind of, it's almost like a meditative brain on steroids, because it happens so much more quickly using these neurofeedback tools. So the same kind of, you'd have to meditate for 4 years every day to get the same effects of a 6-week training with this tool, and it's just 30 minutes a day. So why not use technology to kind of be able to like imprint that in your body? And people don't have time for long meditations anyway. So it's a quick and dirty way to kind of get your brain mentally in the right spot for calmness. But the other part of inner space training is is really is more what I would call the spiritual part of why some people want to go to space, which is very much to feel the overview effect, that feeling of oneness with everything in the universe that some astronauts get. And Edgar Mitchell was one of the first, or the first person to kind of announce that this had happened to him when he had this experience. And in fact, Edgar Mitchell is the one who kind of blessed the techniques within inner space training before he died. He was our board, he was in our board. So he kind of said, yeah, this is a great way to go and kind of call up this inner calmness as well as create these preconditions in the brain to be able to experience something like the overview effect. Because it's not like, there's no guarantee that's going to happen when you go out in space. You have to be lucky. You have to be in the right mental frame of mind. Yeah. And even if you are, it's still not a guarantee. It's like an orgasm. You can do everything to prepare, but it's not a guarantee. So that's kind of, at least you do something to prepare, or else, the chances of it happening are smaller. Not to say it doesn't happen. Look at William Shatner, something happened there, but I would say if you're in a freaked out kind of mood, the chances, that window of something happening are, get smaller and smaller and smaller. So if this is something you want when you go to space, why not prepare for that and see if you can create that?
Yeah, it would definitely be a shame to miss out on that opportunity without having at least done something to prepare for it.
No, indeed.
Yeah. We would like to now move on to a topic that's also very close to Bano and my heart, which is women in space and STEM. And now with International Women's Day coming up next week, and more discussions happening on the topic of what it means to be a woman in this sector. We even saw a couple of weeks ago, there was a great event by Powering Space, which was addressing harassment and abuse in the space sector. Now, even apart from this sad truth, it is a fact that the STEM sector in space in particular is still a very male-dominated field. So we just wanted to ask you a bit about your experience entering the space sector.
Wow, okay. Unfortunately, I have also experienced a few things. I don't know how the level of detail where you want to hear about, but first of all, from a business point of view, I could say, trying to get, as an entrepreneur, my business on the, let's say, radar of some of these space companies, because I believe what I'm offering is really good for the safety of the industry as well as the individual clients. And so, you would think it's a no-brainer, trying to get some, more traction in the industry. And I think, I definitely have experienced, this, what it's like to be excluded. A lot of it is like who and there's a real good old boys network, which is very much alive and well in many of these space companies. And I, unfortunately, have really had to sort of fight hard and for a long time to just, to try to be listened to and things. So, but I think it's difficult, that's maybe, whether that's completely due to a male-female thing or, just not, having, the network. But I think there is a lot about who and, who, that sort of exclusion that happens more towards women. But I think also, from an actual, harassment purposes, I mean, I can give stories, but I have two experiences which come to mind. One is that, when a senior executive and one of the space operators was willing to help promote my business, if I would go back to his hotel room at a space conference, that one springs to mind. And unfortunately, he's still around. And on occasion, I still have to have contact with this guy for business purposes. And I remember another one you know, where there was a guy who said he wanted me to be his coach on a suborbital flight, and pay for me to go and take this trip, which is one of the services that we offer as well in inner space training. Paid for me to actually go to fly to his country to find out only that he wanted to sleep with me. And that was a prerequisite of getting the job. So yeah, you know, I've experienced this too. And yeah, it's pretty shocking, actually. So
very sorry to hear that.
Yeah,
really.
it happens, you know, but it shouldn't actually. But it's not something also I haven't experienced in the oil industry as well. Also a very male-dominated field. So yeah, I think, you know, things are starting to come out now, you know, from other employees, from other space operators. And yeah, I just, I hope it's now, you know, people are starting to talk more, which is a good thing, about what's happened to them, and not hold in these sort of instances, you know, along with shame and everything else. And, you know, I just discovered about a month ago that there's a new group online. There's a Facebook site called Astro Advocates and Allies. They have a Facebook page. Maybe you want to put that name in the chat or something for people who are interested, but it's a group which is, you know, has been formed, you know, by men and women, people who have experienced this in the space industry, to try to give support to the victims, as well as give advice as to how to deal with these issues when it's happening to them in the space organizations. And one of the things that they said, that I remember, which I think is a really good idea, is, you know, holding on to the shame is not the way to go, but telling someone is the first step towards kind of healing, and in addition to holding people accountable. And so, yeah, I think that's, you know, like, I also wonder, like, do I tell these stories? Do I not tell these stories? You know, you want people to work with you, but it's, you know, it's the very, you know, alive, harassment is alive and well in the space industry, unfortunately. And I think it's good to talk about it. So, yeah.
Definitely.
Yes.
And I see Torsten just put the link in the chat to the Powering Space event, which was with 2 of the founding members of this group that you talked about, which was a very nice conversation. Apart from what you just mentioned of, like, being open with this communication and not holding on to the shame, what would you say, or what would you consider steps that would create long-lasting change to make the space sector more inclusive and safe for all?
Yeah, it's I think
it's not an easy question.
No, it's not an easy question. I think, you know, first of all, like I said, telling someone is the first step in healing. But I think, you know, what the next step I would also say is, like, having a logbook of what happened to you, keeping that of what happened to you, getting as descriptive as possible. Who was there? How did it go down? You know, instances of what was said and done by, like, perpetrators, and maybe others who were in the room who maybe did nothing while it was going on. And I think writing this up is, you know, is first of all empowering, but it's also, yeah, I think it's good. It's like, if you need to have that, that when you're talking to HR of a particular industry, like, that you, or a company, sorry, that you've thought about this, you've documented this, people realize you're serious. That's another sort of, thing that helps. And just writing sometimes it out, you know, kind of helps deal with issues. So that's another advice I would offer. But yeah, joining this group, I think, is also, you know, they have a lot more resources. Well, in the sense of, you know, for example, people were talking about, like, some of the space operators want to have a sexual harassment policy, but they don't know how to write one, or they don't know what they're doing. And, you know, they have examples of how you can you know, what a sexual harassment policy looks like, what are the elements, how to make it so that if you really want to do this, you know, that the victim is not getting blamed and, you know, there's no consequences, but, you know, you can do this in a safe way. So building the whole system around, reporting these things. And I think that's really necessary in these companies, especially because, you know, a lot of them were just started kind of in the basement of somebody's house, and they've grown to a company, but they don't maybe necessarily have the same kinds of HR systems and structures in place that, you know, some of the more established older companies have. So I think there's some big gaps.
Yeah, and on the topic of women in space, and also to do a bit of shameless advertising as well, next week we are going to be talking to Simonetta Di Pippo, the director of the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, on International Women's Day. What is one thing that you think we should definitely ask her?
Oh my gosh. Well, I happen to be one of the mentors of the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs. There's a Space for Women subgroup, which I was told is not being funded anymore. Oh. So I would ask her, why not? And because we were sort of surprised, this group of us that were, you know, mentoring several young women who applied for, you know, for mentoring, and so it was going well. And now we've heard that the plug has been pulled, and we're not sure, you know, why that is. So I think that's kind of a shame if that's if that is the case.
Definitely. Well, it's noted.
Yes, we will ask that question. Well, Chiara will ask that question.
So of course we will ask that question.
So we're just giving it away to Torsten for now. But while we are also talking about these topics, it's very important indeed to talk about it and to write about it and to really reflect on your emotions and to find evidence, of course. But let's also switch to a very inspiring source, because during our previous conversation before we met, you were talking about the concept of spiral dynamics, a model that attempts to explain various development levels of people, organizations, and societies that evolve through it. So the concept is quite comprehensive as it goes through individual and global development through the spiral. And the last time you were really explaining it very nicely, and it was really inspiring. So I was wondering if you could describe that to the audience as well.
Yeah, you have to picture like a spiral that's kind of going up. I was gonna bring the visual, but I didn't. But essentially, you know, there are maybe something like 12 layers going up in the spiral. But you can kind of group these layers, you know, based on their center of gravity. And, you know, it's a model for consciousness and self-development, but also you can categorize people, individuals, organizations, societies also in a similar way, because there usually is a center of gravity where, you know, where people are at, you know, like they're at a certain stage in their development. And so if you were to start from the bottom of the spiral, it's you know, it's essentially your worldview is the lowest part of the spiral is called egocentric. Then it goes to ethnocentric, then it goes to world-centric, and then it goes to cosmocentric. And you know, I'm trying, you know, as I talk about these things, I don't want to have any judgment, and it's not meant to be a judging thing. You know, because it's like, for example, a baby is probably the most egocentric kind of individual out there, who's only, you know, wondering about how to go and get food and, you know, their needs met. And, you know, it's extremely egocentric, but that's the stage the baby's at. You know, you can't say to a baby, for example, how come you're not talking yet? What's wrong with you? Because they haven't developed to the next level, you know, this is where they are in their stage of development. So there are individuals, you know, who are focused around, you know, everything according to them, you know, what everything is happening in the world. What does that mean for me? And, you know, examples like Donald Trump, maybe Putin. Putin is maybe kind of in between the ego and the ethnocentric. And this is where, you know, people who's talking about, you know, this is my country versus your country, my religion versus your religion, my football team versus your football team. You know, all of this is ethnocentric. And in fact, probably they say about 75, almost 80% of the whole entire world population is ego or ethnocentric or some combination in terms of their center of gravity. As we move up the spiral, we get into world-centric individuals who are focused on global issues like environmentalism, you know, economic equality for, you know, everybody on the planet. And you get, you know, some people will talk about the word like planetary awareness comes from people who are also kind of on that world-centric view. And then as you move up to the cosmocentric individuals, you get into certain spirituality kinds of ideas that, you know, we're just, you know, one out of millions of or billions of entities in this universe, and, you know, we're nothing basically with everything that's out there. But, you know, people who are cosmic centric are really much focused on, you know, other galaxies, other things. And if you look at, you know, the astronauts in general, they tend to, at least they, when they come back, they're at least on the world-centric level, if not maybe higher on some aspects. You know, Edgar Mitchell, when he went to space, he was a religious man, and he was very much on the ethnocentric level. And when he had this experience of the overview effect, he jumped a level and went at least to, if not one, you know, to world-centric. He went to also to cosmic-centric. And this is what the overview effect does. It actually causes people to jump levels in the spiral, which is so incredible. Now, I find it also interesting when I'm talking to clients who are going to space to find out, why do you want to go to space? Because I got clients on all the levels who, you know, some people want to just do selfies and, you know, look at me, check me out, egocentric. You know, I want to be the first Norwegian in space. Here's my flag. Woo, you know, ethnocentric. I want to go and look outside and, you know, and have the overview effect, you know, world-centric. And then the cosmocentric, I haven't had too many of them, but like people who are into sort of like, you know, lots of spiritual kinds of experiences would be there. And the way I talk to them and the way I train them are different for everybody, you know, who's going up there. So, you know, if I'm trying to say to somebody, you know, like, check out the planet, check out this curvature, like right behind me, you know, the Earth and this incredible experience. When somebody just wants to go and make a rock video in space, they're going to be like, you know, this is nice, but not really what I'm there for. So it's kind of, you know, and the stuff that I tell the, you know, and vice versa, sort of the people who want to just go and make the best rock video is completely sort of a different orientation. And it's really interesting to, like, for me, spiral dynamics explains everything, including what's happening in the world now with a war, and and how difficult it is for somebody who I would say I'm kind of in general on the world-centric level. You know, I can dip down depending on, you know, if my favorite football team is playing or whatever, and we do, you know, or egocentric. We all encompass sort of like everything that's beneath us, but in general, you're on your level, and the kinds of people that you hang out with, you don't even realize it, but they're also probably on your level. And the people that you have clashes with or difficulties with, they're probably not on your level. And the way you can only solve that is by going down the spiral, because they're not able to go up the spiral. They can't see your point of view. Like the baby, can't develop and, you know, speak the language. They haven't just developed to that point.
Yeah.
So it's really helpful for me to kind of think about, like, who am I talking to? Why am I clashing with this person? What can I do to try to sort of bridge that gap if I can? And maybe people, you know, say the same thing about me and say, like, God, she's so world-centric. You know, I can't talk to her.
No, but like you already said, it also depends on the moment and which spiral level you are, depending on if the football game is on and you get like very competitive. Yeah, that can happen. And maybe you spiral down again. But in some cases, it
It's a
goes
moving
up
thing.
and down and it goes moving. Yeah.
It's a moving thing. And I mean, I'm not only world-centric, you know, there's definitely times when I'm way down, you know, and sometimes I dip into, you know, the higher order. And then, you know, it's interesting though, because I'm for both of you, just to ask you a question, like, do you meet individuals that you think like, whoa, they're way up on the spiral? Like, I've met like maybe 4 or 5 people in my life that I think, wow, they're way up there. I would love to have a little bit of what they're having, but I'm so far away from that, you know. Kind of inspiring though.
Definitely met people like that, definitely. And it is very inspiring, but it's also good to talk to them, to maybe learn from their perspective and to see how they perceive stuff. So to learn from each other as well.
Yeah, to travel up the spiral.
Yeah, exactly. And what you're saying
or they can kind of tell you what it's like up there.
Exactly. But moving back to actually what you were saying, everything that goes down in the spiral goes up to it. You can also explain it to what is happening on Earth and in space through this model. But what we were also wondering about is how you can maybe look at this model and link it to the future and what is coming. Because the upmost spiral is turquoise, I saw at least. And it's very peaceful. And looking back at the situation now, it seems very chaotic. So how do you connect this model into what is happening maybe in the future?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, you know, when we start talking about, you know, you hear different space entrepreneurs talking about colonizing space, you know, I have to kind of cringe because I think like, it's bringing the ego and the ethnocentric stuff out into space, which makes me nervous. And I think like, wow, you know, we don't have to go there. We can try to create something, you know, higher out there, you know, like, let's not bring our shit out to space. And the same kind of thinking, what we've created here. So I feel like, you know, we might have to kind of go back down in order to go back up, you know, and maybe the technical stuff to sort of get out there, maybe to have a couple of failed lunar villages with, you know, the colonization mentality, the exploitation mentality of, you know, I'm going to go to the moon and exploit its resources and do, you know, for my company and that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
maybe that has to happen before people say, hey, wait a minute, you know, that's not the way, you know, we intended it to be. And so, you know, I think this is sort of like a, you know, one of these, like a wave where maybe, you know, when we're kind of focused on the, you know, the engineering, the nuts and the bolts, getting out there, we do it the way we've always done it.
Yeah,
because that's been the way, you know, to give success in the past. But you know, you got to be careful, I think, to bring that sort of the mentality of the past also, you know, to where we want to create something much more ideal, much more maybe spiritual, much more something new, something better than what we've done. You know, we don't want to have the earth mentality out there, I think. So
very true.
I have to deal with a couple of flipbacks though, you know, before we get there.
Yeah,
it's always about ups and downs, right?
Right.
As a final question from our side before we move on to our great audience questions, talking about future developments, we just wanted to know, what does your future hold in terms of space? What are your next plans?
Well, I hope in the not too near future, distant future, sorry, I will be getting myself out on a suborbital flight. You know, as a trainer or coach, I have a couple of irons in the fire that I have. I'm hoping at least one will materialize in the next year and a half. Yeah, and to get that experience for myself. But for me, that is not my ultimate journey. Getting to space is, but you know, I want to use these experiences of being able to coach and train people in a bigger, better place, I think, which is maybe in a space hotel, which is supposedly happening in 2027 is kind of the date for that. But I think they're going to need people that have a technical background as well as people who can deal with other people, and especially those who might have panic attacks or other sorts of issues. Imperfect people flying to space, as opposed to the perfect NASA ESA astronauts. We're going to have a lot of imperfect people going, and we're going to need to find ways to make people fit enough mentally and physically to fly out there. So my ultimate dream is to get on one of these. I want to be the innkeeper at the space hotel.
That would be great.
That would be my ultimate.
Yeah, that's actually a really nice way to close off our conversation. So thank you for that outlook to the future. Our audience have some great questions as well. So let's start with that one. Shaba has a question. He's you mentioned setting up the right psychological conditions to experience the overview effect. But what kind of factors do you believe influence this? Do we know how to get the overview effect actually influences the people on a psychological and neuroscientific level?
Yeah, so he's going. So there's the preconditions
exactly
to getting the overview effect, but then once you have the overview effect, you're a different person afterwards. So the preconditions, how to create the preconditions, that's one of the things that we do in inner space training in terms of, first of all, creating the calm mind, which is sort of like a meditative brain that we can create ahead of time to try to get there, but also, not having too many things on the agenda. So if you're planning on going to to experience the overview effect, or you would like to, you have 4 minutes in suborbital space, right? So first of all, the chances are small. So, but you don't want to have several things on your agenda. You want to just say, okay, when I get out there, as soon as like the seatbelts are off and I can look out the window and see this curvature, I'm going to call up my instant calm and just have some, try to get my brain as blank as possible, and not to be thinking, and not to be saying it's going to happen now. Because it definitely won't happen then. But so, getting that calm focus is important. But after you have that, I mean, like, I haven't been to space, and I haven't experienced the overview effect. But looking at William Shatner, for example, how he's a changed man, and how, I think it's so important to harness the, what would you call this? The momentum, or, of the new person that you have touched upon, and to start by processing that back on Earth in terms of not only sort of inspiring other people with what happened to you, but to try to kind of use this as a force for good and paying it forward, and, trying to get people to sort of understand what happened to you, and try to get, to inspire people to try to perhaps have the overview effect here on Earth. There's other ways of maybe having that kind of a mystical experience where you feel that oneness with everything and everyone. Some people say, there's some drugs like ayahuasca and, mushrooms, but that's one way. But there's other ways maybe that doesn't involve that either. But just by, being in that state, the more you're in that state, the likelihood of having something like this happen becomes higher. The more you're in your frantic day-to-day, world, it ain't gonna happen. So yeah, being more conscious about that and trying to see, create more of that on Earth, because I believe if Putin was out there and experiencing this, we wouldn't be having any wars, So I really, to me, my, drive to want to get more people to experience this in space is for that reason, that I really do believe the place would be a better place the more people experience that, I don't know if I answered your question.
Very nice. Thank you so much. Due to a lack of time, we're just going to take one more of the audience questions, and we'll take one from Mark Stokes, who's joining us from the UK. And he also has a question about the whole training setup as well, because you mentioned before that about dumbing down the mission slightly. So he's asking if like the autonomous systems and ground control, if they have removed many aspects of the training. And if so, does the training include psychological and behavioral training for worst case scenarios as well? Yeah, I'm gonna make an assumption that he's talking about suborbital space here. So the dumbing down part to me has to be done ahead of time. I'm also in a group. It's got the American Standards Technical Committee for spaceflight safety, and we are creating standards, medical standards, but also safety standards that we hope soon, these space operators will start to adapt. And obviously, for example, if you have for an Virgin Galactic flight, there's a netting to get into the cockpit, and behind the netting is where passengers are. If people want to get into the cockpit, they can get arms and things pretty close into the cockpit. At the moment, I don't think things are dumbed down enough so that there's no interference from the passenger side into the cockpit side. Blue Origin's a different setup. There's no cockpit. That it's all being flown, from ground control. So it's not going to interfere with the flight itself, but there's a lot of things that still have to be done and adapted in order to get to this idiot-proof, I'm not going to hurt you, you're not going to hurt the system kind of state. And a lot of that is the engineering and sort of like what happens with the, in adopting these standards ahead of time. But one of the other things that we do in the training is to simulate the 4 minutes of weightlessness, where we start to realize all the areas where we're having interference with one another. Like I'll give, different people different tasks, like a suborbital researcher, somebody making a rock video, and all of a sudden, lo and behold, we're getting in each other's ways, and we're not even 0G. We're doing this on the ground. And we start to realize like, oh, hey, maybe we need to think and put all the suborbital researchers, in the back of the plane and everybody else in the front. So at least, we're trying to think smarter. That's human factors engineering, by the way, trying to sort of get to create a situation or a design inside where people are less interfering with one another, but also working things out. Like if I know I need to still go and get my payload and it's going to be in front of you, that you don't get in my face while I'm doing this. And then let's plan like, okay, here I go. I'm talking to you as I'm reaching behind you. Please don't kick me by accident. I'm going to be out of your way in 10 seconds. Okay, I'm back. And we can, through communication, through practice, through physically seeing where, people are in relation to where I am, we can start to, cancel out some of the things that we can deal with at least ahead of time. So it's not all one big surprise, which is typically what it will be without anybody doing training like this. So that's what I mean by kind of dumbing down, or at least, trying to get rid of those areas of interference, whether it's human to human or human to machine.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
I think it does. Thank you so much. And I mean, a huge thank you, Mindy, for for this inspiring conversation, for this great talk. I think Bano and I both had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We were really looking forward to today. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Where did the time go?
I know. An hour can go by so quickly.
Yeah, we need to next time. So
yeah. No, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
yeah,
Really great.
you.
And with that, we conclude our Space Café BeNeLux for today. But don't worry, there's going to be another one. So we already have a save the date. So on the 10th of June, we will have our next Space Café BeNeLux, and more information will be on Eventbrite soon. We also have a full set of next exciting events. So as I mentioned before, on the 8th of March, International Women's Day, we have our 33 minutes with Simonetta Di Pippo, which is a great way to continue the conversation about women in space and STEM. Then on the 10th of March, we have our next Space Café Australia by Annie Hanmere, which is at 6:30 a.m. CET, so a bit early for us in Europe, but a good time for all of those joining in Australia. And Annie will be joined by Bryony Sturgis, and they will be talking about space and governance. Then on the 15th of March, we have the next 33 minutes with Dr. Andreas Wittmer on the topic of what can space and space regulation learn from the aviation sector. On the 21st of March, we have our next Space Café Black Ops, which is now being hosted by the wonderful Dr. Emma Gatti. And then on the 22nd of March, we have 33 minutes with Josef Aschbacher, which will be our 100th episode of the 33-minute format. So very exciting. And together, Josef Aschbacher and Torsten will talk about European space from an outlook considering the new reality. On the 23rd and the 24th of March, there's the next Impulse 22, the Space Outreach Conference. So definitely worth signing up for that. And on the 24th of March, we have our wonderful Space Law Breakfast hosted by Stephen Freeland. As always, all events will be online on Eventbrite. And as always, we love to hear your feedback. So please check in with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Don't forget to sign up for our daily and biweekly newsletters. And if you want to treat yourselves to something special, become a Space Watcher today. Thank you all so much in the audience for your interest, for your great questions. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, and thank you, Mindy, for our inspiring talk and being our guest for today. And thank you again to the entire team behind the scenes for doing a great job week and week again. So I hope you will all stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you for us for joining. Hope to see you next week. In the meantime, visit our website and follow us on social media. And don't forget, once again, become a Space Watcher.
Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Mindy.